Normally when I introduce a podcast episode, I try to say something controversial or, interesting or attention-getting, whatever. This one, I'm going to be simple. We're going to talk to an Olympic handball player. And if you don't even know what that is, you're going to love this. And if you do know what that is, you're going to love it even more. So that's what's going to come on this episode of the Movement, the podcast for people who want to know the truth about what it takes to have a happy, healthy, strong body, starting feet first, because, those things are your foundation after all. And we break down the propaganda, the mythology, sometimes the outright lies you've been told about what it takes to have a happy, healthy, strong body and to work and play and do yoga and CrossFit and tennis and pickleball and anything you do, basically, and to do that enjoyably, effectively, efficiently. Did I say enjoyably? Wait, I know I did. That's a trick question, but my brain is a little mush because it's Halloween today when we're recording this. And I don't know why. Oh, it's the candy that made me a little nutty. So anyway, I'm Stephen Sashin from XeroShoes.com, your host of the Movement. And we call it that because we're creating a movement that's a thing and something happening in society about natural movement, about letting your body do what it's made to do. And that first part involves you. It's free. It's easy. It's simple. All you do is share and like and give us a thumbs up and reviews, etc. And go to www.jointhemovementmovement.com to find previous episodes, all the places you can get the podcast, all the ways you can interact with us on social media. There's no cost to join. That's just the domain that I got. But look, the drill. If you want to be part of the tribe, just subscribe. So now here we are. Ebiye, do me a favor. Tell people who you are and what you're doing here with your handball ninja shirt.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ebiye Jeremy Udo-Udoma. I am one of the captains of the USA Men's Beach Handball National Team. My nickname internationally is Handball Ninja, as you see on this shirt here. And I'm excited to be on the podcast, Stephen. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Ebiye. No, it's a thrill having you because, you reached out to us at some point and said, if I'm remembering this correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I remember at some point getting an email. It's like, hey, I'm wearing your shoes. And by the way, I'm an Olympic handball player. And we're like, what? So first of all, that's how this started. But I was hip to handball a little bit. But for those who aren't, who think of handball as a thing you play in the streets of New York, where you're literally just, smacking a ball against a wall. And it's a variation of actually, there's no other, you know what it is? It's highlight without the thing that you use to throw a ball in highlight. And someone will leave in the comments what that thing's called, because I can't remember right now. Pelota, I think. Anyway, so tell people about highlight, and then also about, not about highlight. Jesus, holy moly, man. I have got to start this day all over. Talked about handball, and we'll dive in from there.
Yeah, so handball is commonly known or referred to as soccer with your hands. Like, that was the initial premise of the sport. So if you think of a game involving trying to put a ball into a net, similar to soccer, 11 people on a field, they essentially decided, let's just use our hands and call that a sport.
Wait.
And that was I know, right? Like, that's the original origin of the sport.
Well, when
11 on 11. Depending on the historian that you ask, the roots of the game are traced back to 19th century Europe. As far as the original version of the game, and I'll kind of explain how the game has evolved since then.
Yeah.
But its initial roots were soccer, or football known internationally. Somebody saying, hey, we should just do this with our hands. And that version of handball was actually the first version of handball. We call it field handball. That was a part of the Summer Olympic program in 1936 in Berlin. What ended up happening was throughout the 40s and 50s, they took that concept of the game and they moved it indoors for the winter. And they found that it was a more attractive game because players can throw the ball quite as far on a full 11 on 11 soccer field, condensing the court where passes could be closer, shots could be more frequent. There's an indoor version of the game that was 7 on 7 in size that became the more popular version of handball versus the original 11 on 11 soccer with your hands version of the game. And in the 1972 Olympic Games, indoor handball became the version of handball that was on the Summer Olympic program. And it's been there in the 50 years since.
So do people still play outdoor? Is there still an outdoor league or outdoor tournaments?
Outdoor field handball is generally played recreationally, and very rarely is it played the full 11 on 11 version that was in the 1936 Olympic Games. But handball is played, similar to soccer being played across different surfaces. If you think of futsal and beach soccer and indoor soccer and field soccer, handball is another sport that is played across different surfaces. Just the indoor 7-on-7 version is the one in the Senior Summer Olympic Games, and it's arguably the most popular version of the game played worldwide. But fast forward to the 21st century, similar to beach volleyball becoming a spinoff of indoor volleyball and finding its niche, beach handball had its first world championship at the turn of the millennium, and it's the trendy, hip, younger cousin of handball. It's a game that emphasizes aesthetics. There's generally less contact between the players than in the indoor version of the game, and that's to promote more freedom of movement. So you tend to see more spectacular and acrobatic plays in the beach version of the game. And that's the version that I'm currently captain of our U.S. national team.
Do you have to wear a little thong like the beach volleyball girls?
No, oddly enough, we actually went through our version of Bikini Gate.
Oh, really?
During the pandemic. So on the women's side, it's actually really funny you asked the question, but on the women's side, their uniform was a bikini uniform that was mandated. And at the 20 championships, the Norwegian women's team actually protested that. So they played the Spanish national team in the third place game with some shorts to protest that uniform. And then it actually became one of the bigger public stories throughout the pandemic. There were friends of mine and celebrities that were talking about beach handball, and I've been trying to turn them on to the sport for a decade. But this Bikini Gate issue becoming global had a couple of my friends, hey, this is the sport you play, right? Like, well, how come the women have to wear bikinis? I was like, I've been trying to tell you about this sport for 7 years, and now you want to talk about it because you want to change our women's uniform. But ultimately, their uniform did get changed, albeit with some controversy on the other end, because there were some women's players who said, hey, we feel more comfortable competing in a bikini, and we didn't want that uniform to change. And in most competitions, and what we go about in the United States is we follow beach volleyball, and having a more flexible, teams can pick a uniform length and cut that is comfortable for them to wear. And that's generally how we do U.S. competitions. Internationally, there's just a standardized new uniform that has a little bit more material on top, and then it's shorts versus bikini bottoms. But very funny that you asked the question off the cuff, because that was something that we very recently went through in our sport.
Well, I'm curious. See, if I was on the men's side and this was coming up, the way I would have done a protest is I would have had all the men going out wearing a bikini bottom and just say, just see how you like it now. So
believe it or not, when this was going on, our men's team was thinking of ways in which we could advocate for our women's players. And that idea came up. And then a couple of guys were like, let's see if we can find another way to help them out.
I'm guessing, and please don't pass this on to the people who said no to that idea. I'm just guessing the people who didn't want to do it were worried about whether they could fill out a bikini bottom.
Sure, let's go with that rationale. We'll say that was the reason why.
Yeah, okay. I know at some point I'm going to get beaten up by a couple of handball players.
No, we're a non-violent group of guys. We're very fair play oriented, so don't worry about any retaliation.
I just accused a couple of them of not packing, so that's a whole other story. But I don't know them, so I don't know who it was. It was all a joke. I don't want to be walking down the beach and get hit by a ball in the back of the head. So, but backing up, I've got to say this, with the description of soccer with your hands, that does not do it justice, because soccer, while it can be engaging sometimes, especially as the ball gets close to the net, handball is like exciting 24/7. I mean,
really. And one thing to that, because I've become a beach sport ambassador and aficionado since I've gotten involved with beach handball. And I've become a beach soccer fan. I'm good friends with a number of the players on both the women's and men's beach soccer national teams. And beach soccer, to me, is the most exciting version of soccer there is, because the field is small enough that anybody can score at any time.
Right.
So I think the issue that some people may have with soccer being not quite as exciting as handball has to do with the size of the field. Because when you have such a big field, buildup takes a long period of time. But beach soccer, in contrast, the field is small enough that literally anybody can score at any time. Like, because both goals are close enough. And to me, that's what makes beach soccer an extremely exciting version of soccer. And handball being a size court that is, similar to basketball, a little bit longer. You have fast breaks, you have such quick transitions. It's a very high scoring game, as you're alluding to. I think part of it has to do with the size of the field, not just the fact that we get to use our hands over our feet.
There's a joke in there about size, which is going to become a theme in this podcast, I can tell. So, it's funny. I'm thinking about we were talking to USA Rugby about working with them, and we got invited to a world championship match. And the rugby pitch is even bigger than the soccer pitch. And the thing that was interesting is the delineation is between the number of players on the field. And when there's more players on the field, ironically, the game moves a little slower. When there's only 7 guys on each side on the field, it is insane because it's just, people sprinting like crazy and then smashing into each other. I mean, it's like roller derby. No, I mean,
the same concept applies even within the sport of handball. And part of what's increased attractiveness of the sport over time is moving to smaller sided versions of the game where there is more space for players to move more freely. So if you compare beach handball, which is a 4-on-4 game, versus indoor handball, which is 7-on-7, the beach game is extremely fast.
Interesting.
Yeah. The 7-on-7 version of the game it's faster than 11-on-11, but not quite as fast. And so, and I don't know if you know that I actually have experience with USA Rugby.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Played on the 6-a-side version of rugby national team for the US. And that game is extremely fast because players have to cover a full pitch with a small number of guys. And with so much open space, everybody's able to sprint around versus with 15s rugby, the more people you have on the pitch, there's less space. And so the general pace of play will slow down.
Well, the other thing with the 15s, I'm guessing, is that there's more guys who are just monsters. I mean, they're fast, but, they're monsters. And I mean, the first time these guys all walked on the field, I said, this is a group where every one of those guys could walk up to Mike Tyson and go, pussy. and he would back down. I mean,
Mike's a different breed, but point taken. No, the guys on our 15 squads, they're just massive human beings.
Oh, my God.
Especially the front line.
Yeah, that front line is just incredible. And I mean, there's times where from the other side of the pitch, I mean, a good 100 meters away, you hear a collision that sounds like a car crash. I mean, geez. Anyway, but enough about rugby. So how did you end up getting involved in handball at all? Because this is not a sport, obviously, that is super, super popular in America, and definitely not whenever it was you got introduced to it.
Certainly. And I don't get old. It never gets old for me to tell my handball origin story. So when I was 15 years old, I was going into my junior year of high school during the Summer Olympics in what was then Beijing. And just that summer, I happened to be flipping through channels. I happened to flip to a handball game right as a goal was being scored. I was like, oh, what was that? It was just something that caught my attention. I'm watching this game go back and forth, and it looked like water polo, but it was on land. And basketball was my first love, and it looked like basketball, but there were goalies at the end. And for as much as a sports aficionado as I thought I was, I had never seen or heard of this sport. So I thought, and I'm just trying to figure out, like, what is this sport? So I'm watching it. I'm looking for a name to come up, somebody to mention it. And it wasn't until the end of the game that there was a handball decal with the Olympic logo that came up. It's like, handball. Did a Google search, and it was news to me that it was an Olympic sport. It seemed like something that my 5th grade PE teacher made up. But I didn't know that actually passing and catching and trying to throw a ball into a net outside of water was an Olympic sport until I happened to stumble across it at Olympic Games. And I became so enamored with it that the rest of the Olympic Games, I did whatever I could to watch a handball game. And LA to Beijing is a bit of a time zone difference. So I'm up at 2, 3 a.m. trying to catch some of these handball games. And at the end of the Olympics, I was so enamored with the sport. I asked around, like, friends, family, did Google searches looking for just a place to play the sport. and I stumbled across the Portland Sasquatch Handball Club. I don't know if I mentioned I grew up in a suburb of Portland, Oregon. And I sent them an email, said, hey, I play basketball and baseball at Lakers High School. And if there's any opportunity for me to try out handball, I don't know what the league season is or what, the competitive teams are like, because I played AAU basketball and I'm familiar with different sporting systems in the U.S., both playing for your school and playing separately of that. And they said, yeah, just come out. And the first day, they kind of tricked me. The first day that I came out. So the very first day I came out, they were actually putting on a youth clinic at the school where one of the players in the club was a German teacher. And so it was a German-American exchange, and she brought out her German students to play handball. So my first day out, I'm playing with high school kids, like kids my age. Little did I know that that wasn't the composition of the actual club. So I come back the second week, and it's the entire adult club that shows up. And they essentially embraced me as one of their own. Obviously didn't know much about handball, but I was a pretty good athlete. And they said, look, we'll have you play on the wing, which is basically as far from the middle of the court as possible. When we get the ball, run as fast as you can. Otherwise, we'll take care of the rest as far as like organizing and actually playing. And that's how I got started. And honestly, it was the perfect place for me to get started, just cherry picking on the wing with a bunch of older guys who were more experienced, but they were past their prime athletically. And over time, they directly and also via osmosis just taught me the game and the flow and the movement of the game. And I played with them the remainder of my time in high school, and then made the decision to go to Oregon State University, one of the only schools in the U.S. and the only school in what was then the Pac-10, but now the Pac-12, to date my age, that had a college club handball team.
So how big is handball, in the U.S. and then outside of the U.S.? And what are the opportunities here if somebody wants to play?
That's a great question. So membership was just over 1,000 people for USA Team Handball last year, which in the grand scheme of an Olympic sport is very small. We're actually the smallest national governing body under the Team USA umbrella.
Wow.
To give you reference for how relatively overlooked the sport of handball is stateside, but it is a massive sport internationally. I know it was the second highest rated team sport at the Summer Olympic Games in Rio. I don't have the specific analytics for Tokyo, but it is a very well-received sport globally. There are a number of professional opportunities, primarily in Europe, to play the sport. And it's such a weird dichotomy for us as Americans that put billions of dollars into a sport to have this one Olympic sport just seemingly slip through the cracks, where we invest so much into so many different sports. Obviously we have our big three in gridiron football, basketball, baseball, and then the other sports like soccer, hockey, water polo, volleyball that have X number of followers. But handball, for whatever reason, just slipped through the cracks in North America as a professional and Olympic sport that just never got traction. Yet, not just within the country, but within the content. But yet is a key term, and a big part of what I try to do as a national team player, as well as someone who serves on the board of directors for USA Team Handball, is change just that and help grow opportunities and build exposure to the sport for fellow Americans. Because I've been able to play in 20 countries outside of the U.S. In my international athletic career, and I've had some great experiences, and I want to be able to share some of what this sport can offer, not just domestically, but globally with fellow Americans.
It's actually a funny but interesting pitch is, given that it is so small in America, the opportunity, if you get in and are good, to do something like, play internationally is obviously much higher than if you're trying to get into a sport where there's a lot of guys above you who are going to get those positions.
I 100% agree. And, there's a little bit of an internal debate amongst like former USA Team Handball Olympians and newer players as far as how accessible we want the sport to be. Because naturally we're competitive guys. We don't want to make it seem like average Joe can be on our national team. But I'm more on the side of, I want the average American who comes across this to feel as if they could be my teammate, whether it's at the World Beach Games next year in 2023, if we end up qualifying for the Paris Olympic Games, There's so many amazing American ball sport athletes who play basketball, baseball, football, water polo, who just do not know that they're elite handball players. But if you give them a handball, they'll have the athletic attributes to be able to cross in. And internally, it's a bit of a debate as far as, how much of kind of an old boys or closed boys club we want this to be, and how much of a, you definitely can be an Olympian through this sport. This is going to be your best bet.
Well,
if you play other sports.
It reminds me of the former sprinters who then became bobsledders because they were great on the back of the sled. And so, to get someone of some notoriety from some other sport to join handball is the kind of thing that make it move. But of course, the biggest thing is getting kids starting to play, because obviously the bigger the pool that you're able to draw from, the more you're going to start finding players that are really, really talented, and they'll always rise to the top. But this just makes me think of a fun question, which is, what was the conversation like when you said to your parents you were going to be a professional handball player?
And to give you some context, I didn't necessarily grow up in an athletic family. I mean, I have some athletes in my family, but I grew up in an academic family. My mom's a Harvard Law grad. Dad went to Yale. Law is the family trade. I have a grandfather who was Prime Minister of Uganda. And so I grew up in a family that very much prized academia, and they supported, sport to an extent. But, the decisions I made late teens, early 20s to really pursue a sport at the time wasn't so initially well received, especially considering that handball isn't like basketball, where it's like, okay, at least we know what this sport is and the amount of opportunity there is in it. Like, what's this handball thing? But it was just something that, I fell in love with. And I mean, there's so many different levels and layers to the story, but just to kind of stay on topic with the question that you asked, initially not so great, but, families over time come around. They found the sport to be very exciting. And particularly as, I've been able to play for Team USA over the past 8 years. And it wasn't until my third year internationally that I had some family members come out to my first World Championships. And then from that point, once they got to see it in person, they got hooked, and they've been supportive ever since. But the initial conversation wasn't so hunky-dory, to say the least.
If it makes you feel any better, I graduated from Duke and told my father I was going to be a stand-up comic, and that went over like a lead balloon.
I can imagine.
Yeah. The only thing that I had in my back pocket, literally, I had a letter from Northwestern Business School saying, if you want to come, it's free. And so I said, let's just try this for a year, and, we'll take it from there. Meanwhile, I had no intention of ever going to Northwestern Business School. And
but you bought yourself a year.
I bought myself a year, and at the end of the year, he's asking me about my friends who went to business school. I said, I'm making more money than the guys who just got out of business school, and I'm working an hour a day, and I'm having a blast. So we're done with this conversation. He never quite got it. I'm curious, when you go to an international match, or even but especially, I was going to say even national, but definitely an international match, I'm wondering how much it's like when I went to the Atlanta Olympics as a spectator and watched Greco-Roman wrestling. And what I mean more specifically is, other than me, it seemed that everybody who was watching those matches was either a current wrestler, a former wrestler, or family of a wrestler. And it made the event it was a giant picnic. I mean, everyone knew each other. They'd all been around each other. And my favorite part was there was this one Polish wrestler who was just having an incredible Olympic Games. And everyone knew he was he was wrestling way above where he normally was. And everyone was so excited to see him kind of breaking out that suddenly everybody was Polish. The entire audience was like screaming, Polska! I mean, because they knew. And it was just like, how could you not be excited for this guy? It was the best.
Handball definitely has a similar culture. And funny enough that you mentioned Polska, because I played my club ball in Poland this summer. And Poland is one of the more well-liked countries, particularly in beach handball.
Oh, I love it.
So it's actually ridiculously funny that you use Poland as an example. But actually, the last World Championships, the team that took that spot as the country that the fans locally ended up joining was the Netherlands on the women's side. They ended up having an amazing run. They won bronze in the competition. And their fans that came out were in all orange, similar to the orange that I'm wearing, right? And as they're making this run, They're playing the semifinals, the third place game. Yeah, the fans that were Dutch were joining the Dutch crowd of fans because their cheers were so fun, and it was just a fun team to root for. So there is some of that element of camaraderie, and for the people in the sport being a big part of the crowd, particularly in non-world championship events. You tend to have more of the local fans who are in the sport or connected to the sport in some regard. And when everybody knows everybody, and I can say this as a player, I've played in 5 world tournaments, you get to know the other players and you start to form relationships with them, and you get to a point where everybody knows everybody. And
well, that's it. I imagine
it's a fun dynamic.
I mean, imagine, look, everybody, athletes are athletes, you want to win. But when it's not like there's a boatload of money at the end of the rainbow, I imagine that at the end of a match, regardless of what happens, there's definitely all right, let's go out and have a drink kind of mentality.
Yeah, there's definitely a camaraderie. And I'd say post competition, we definitely as athletes, we find a way to get together and have a good time. And I'll leave it at that.
I love it. Well, I hope people, I'm going to ask one other, well, maybe more, but I got one other specific handball question in mind. And this comes from one of the athletes we work with is Rafael Stotz. He's an MMA fighter. And I asked him, for people who don't follow MMA, if they're going to watch a fight, and especially if they're going to watch his upcoming fight, which a little over a month from, this is November, a little over a month from now, 5 weeks from now, he's going to be in a world championship fight. And I said, for people who don't know MMA, what should they look for? How do they watch it so they are not just watching people just smack each other and roll around and they have no frame of reference for what's happening? And I'll tell you his answer for the fun of it. He said, you want to look to see who is in control. And interestingly, you can be in control from the bottom. So it might look like, you're on your back and you're getting beaten up, but you're actually the guy in control. And if you're looking for that, trying to just understand what control looks like, even if you don't know what that means, it gives you a way of kind of getting in. Like with gymnastics, I'm a former All-American gymnast. When I tell people about certain events in gymnastics, you can describe certain things to look for other than whether someone falls off or not. Yeah. That gives you a way of getting some sense of how to judge from your own little armchair whether someone's doing well or not. So is there an analogous thing like that for handball, so people, when they're watching, how they can feel like they know how to watch?
Certainly. And in both instances, both the gymnastics example as well as the MMA example, there are parallels in handball. As far as control in MMA, I'd say that's a similar concept in handball. You want to get a feel for which team is more in control. And you can see that offensively and defensively. Teams that are a little more frantic or a little more sporadic are probably on the losing end. Generally efficient offenses are those where guys have calm faces. And because you could tell like they're in control, they're getting to the spots that they want to get to on the court. If they're having the defense rotate and scramble while they're composed, like that's generally the team that's better. And then vice versa, if the defense is well positioned and the offense is looking to break through and they feel stuck and they start getting frantic and they have less control, they're probably going to be less efficient overall. So I'd say that concept of control, as far as if you don't understand the sport, but you're trying to figure out, okay, who's winning or who's doing well, look for the team that's more composed. That's probably the team that's in the lead. So very direct parallel as far as your MMA example. And then with gymnastics, one of the things that's unique to beach handball as a discipline is you get extra points for performing spectacular goals. So exactly. So spin, if you do a 360 or more rotations before you score, it's actually worth extra. If you throw the ball in the air to a teammate and they catch in the air and they shoot and score before they land, and if for those of us who are familiar with basketball, it's akin to an alley-oop.
Yeah.
Right. That's also worth extra as well. And so one of the things that we try to work on in our sport is that, element of increased body control and awareness and kind of the spectacular movements similar to what you see in gymnastics, and try to utilize that in an effective means to score. And so that's something that, fans who maybe don't know about handball or beach handball, and this is their first introduction to it, if they stumble across my page or that of my team, like those are the things that they can look for, those spins and alley-oop and spectacular type of goals.
So has anyone done a forward or backflip goal yet?
Yes.
Ah,
And
I want to see
with
it.
that, the sport is deemed that to be too dangerous of a spectacular action to perform. And so it's a maneuver that is particularly outlawed at this point. It was previously done.
Oh, man.
Another exciting action that you can't legally do is propel yourself off of a teammate.
I was going to ask that one because, like watching rugby, the thing, where they will like grab someone
in a line out,
and just, lift someone 10 feet in the air. Yeah.
You
So
legally cannot do that anymore in handball. There's some kids who have tried, and there have been some horror stories that I personally haven't witnessed myself, but enough to outlaw that particular action. As well as a live front flip, but they have been performed and they are quite aesthetically pleasing when pulled off.
Well, it's a big debate in the gymnastics world as well. There are certain moves that, when I was in high school, there was actually, I'll tell the story this way. When I got to college, I asked the coach to spot me for this one particular move. And I said, you just have to stand there unless it looks like something's going wrong. And it's called a running 1 and 3. Basically, it's a 1.5 front somersault. You end up in a dive roll. So you take off on your feet, you spin around, and you're basically, trying not to land on your head, but past your head.
Yeah.
And he actually spotted me badly, and I ended up ripping a bunch of muscles in my back. And years later, I said, why'd you do that? He goes, well, because there was only one other guy in the world who was doing that move, and I didn't think you were the other one. So I thought you were just lying when you said you were going to do it and trying to show off. It's like, no, I was one of the 2 guys. But that same year, there was like 3 guys who ended up paralyzed. So, so there's that weird thing where you get extra points for risk.
Yeah.
Some of this stuff is stupid.
Yeah, I know there are a number of sports that have a dynamic where you're trying to push the sport forward.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't necessarily want, not even for athletes who can do something, but if athletes can do something, if you think of someone like a Simone Biles, that the majority of human beings just cannot do, but they try to replicate it, they're very likely to hurt themselves. Because I know, if I'm not mistaken, because you're more akin to the gymnastics world than I was, that there's a pretty strong debate when she started performing a couple maneuvers that were either outside of the scoring system or...
Well, they were inside, but it was really...
Inside the scoring system, yeah.
But it was just that. It's like, should we allow this because it is so risky?
Risky, yeah.
On the one hand, it's like she's the only one who can do it. You could let her do it. But inspires other people to try. There's a move that now looks quaint that Kurt Thomas did. It was a 1.5 twisting back 1.5. So you're taking off backwards, but you end up doing it like a 1 and 3, like a dive roll out of it. And I actually had a conversation with a 3-time or 2-time Olympic gymnast who I met a couple of weeks ago who used to do this move. He goes, oh yeah, there was once where I hit my head when I landed, and the rest of the routine, I just had no memory of it at all. And it's the kind of thing that, he hit his head as he was rolling, but it definitely wakes you up.
Yeah, not for sure.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And there's things like that in just regular diving too. Basically anything where you have the possibility of landing on your head, they don't want you doing it.
Exactly. Yeah, it reminds me of Soraya Benali, who was a figure skater who did the first backflipping competition, and how much of a controversy that was.
Huge
controversy.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because we're as spectators, we're looking for those exciting things, and people are always pushing to do those things. And I don't think people realize what the real risk is. But at the same time, and I think some of it's related to how popular the sport is, because we actually all know how risky just playing football is. But people are like, we're going to keep playing football. But in gymnastics, they'll have an opinion, like with Simone, when she said, I need to take a mental health break. And people are like, you're a chicken. Your responsibility is to the sport, to be entertained. It's like, oh, no, I don't think you get what it's like when there's a move that you've been doing successfully that's super dangerous. And then you do it once and you realize you were totally lost for the first time ever. It's like, I got to back up. And people just don't get the terror of not trusting yourself anymore.
I can only imagine. It's also one of the things I can relate to, at least in Simone's particular situation, is when you're doing something that most people aren't doing,
Yeah.
Sometimes the degree of difficulty gets lost because you're kind of in your own space and you're trying to push the envelope of it. And people may not necessarily be able to relate to, okay, I made that move look easy, but it was extremely difficult or is dangerous.
No, you nailed it. It's because when you can do it well, it doesn't look difficult.
Difficult, yeah.
I mean, I remember, for the sake of rambling about myself for a second, when I watched video of my competitions, the simplest moves got the most response because, I mean, I was like flipping really high in the air, but it was a simple move, but it was just like really high. But the really difficult stuff looked easy and didn't seem like it was a big deal. It's like, no, that's the one that I spent 4 years working on.
Yeah. I can 100% relate to that, even within the sport of handball.
I'm sure.
The moves that people relate to versus the moves that technically are the more difficult ones. There's definitely a discrepancy between the two.
Sorry, I got to do this one. This is my favorite version of that. Have you ever gone to a Cirque du Soleil show?
I have once. It was incredible.
Oh, it's my favorite. The first one I saw was, 30 plus years ago. The last words I heard after the show ended was, "Sir, you have to leave now." Because I was just in the stands crying. I was just so impressed and thinking, I should be doing that with my life. I'm glad I didn't. But regardless, there was one of the early shows, I forgot the name. There's these two brothers. They do a hand balancing act. And you wouldn't know they were brothers. One is really big and blonde, and the other was still pretty big, but not that big, and a brunette guy. And they used to do this one bit where the blonde guy, he's lying on his stomach on the ground, and the brunette guy is doing a handstand on his feet. Okay. And then what the blonde guy does is he gets up. So he's on his knees. The other guy's still doing a handstand on his feet. And then basically the blonde guy does a leg curl with the guy doing a handstand on his feet. And it's like, he tries and doesn't make it. And he tries again and doesn't make it. And then he tries and then he makes it. And the place goes crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I just so happened, again, I stayed till way after people were supposed to leave. Yeah. I saw these guys warming up for the next show. And he was doing that hamstring curl with the guy doing handstands on his feet, like just, sets of 20.
Yeah, like it was nothing, but it was definitely selling effortless.
Effortless, yeah. So
I guess that's part of the performance is selling the struggle or selling the journey of the struggle, even if it's something that's relatively simple for you at a certain point.
Yeah, look, it's a show. It's not. So anyway, so on to the part where we kind of hinted at the beginning. I'd love for you to chat just about this whole phenomenon. You're an athlete who is on your feet doing things. You somehow discovered us and have been happily wearing Xero Shoes. Can you talk about just how you found us, what made you interested, and what your experience has been from getting out of, shoes that look like the thing I'm holding up, this big, thick, padded, elevated motion control, whatever, to what you're now wearing?
And my journey into barefoot shoes or to minimalist shoes started when I made the transition from our indoor handball national team to our beach handball national team in 2015, because that was the first time I'd played a barefoot sport, and very quickly recognizing that it's a different dynamic playing a sport without shoe support or pad support, just how you articulate your feet. And in my case, this is the first time I was playing a sport in sand. And it became quite evident that strengthening my feet was going to become important for me to be successful. And that was something that I didn't just want to do on the court, something that I realized that I wanted to integrate into my life, as I made beach handball a part of what I wanted to do. And as I started transitioning to minimalist footwear, discovering some other companies, what happened during the pandemic was I competed in February 2020. The world shut down a couple weeks after my competition in Mexico. I was back in California, just training at home. And I wanted to chronicle the type of training I was doing during the pandemic, right? Because I wasn't, around my teammates, I wasn't playing the sport, but just training by myself. And I wanted to really chronicle this particular and unique period of time known as COVID-19. And the world shut down March of 2020. My birthday was in June of 2020. And I had this idea in May to make a video, basically just capturing how I was training March, April, May by myself. And I wanted a pair of all black minimalist shoes. And I just happened to stumble across you guys. I was familiar with a couple of other companies, but I happened to stumble across a Prio that was an all black Prio. And there was one in my size 15. was like, okay, this is going to be perfect for the video and be a chance to at least try out a different minimalist shoe. And I got the pair, loved it, wore it in the video that I shot. I ended up winning World Games Athlete of the Month through that video as a result of inspiring people to train in isolation during the pandemic. And I happened to be wearing a pair of Prios in that video. And through Rachel, on the social media team, she reached out and was like, "Oh my God, this video is incredible, and you're in our shoes, and we have to interview you. We have to get to know your story." And things just took off from there, and explored more of the line. And it's essentially the soul of my footwear collection at this point, and it's very in line with who I am on and off the court. And it's just been a great 3 years just living life foot first.
Hey, thank you. And we don't need to dwell on that because you just made me think of something else that in the little bit of time we have left. One of the things that I really love when I've talked to you is, I don't think people think about this a whole lot, is what it's like being a professional athlete, a world-class athlete, and what you're doing when you're not doing that sport or when you're not training specifically or explicitly for that sport. And I'm going to set you up. I'm teeing this one up and you can hit it totally out of the park. There's another thing that you discovered that you do, that you do when you're not training that actually facilitates your play. And I think you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I do. And I'm pretty sure it's dancing is what you're teasing me up for. It is dancing.
And let's be clear, it is a special kind of dancing. Yeah. What is the dancing that you do?
More specifically, social dancing or partner dancing. And that's something that I've found to be, on a number of levels, conducive to my handball game.
It just occurred to me. It occurs to me now that I would think that being a good social dancer, and this is like swing and salsa, those kind of things. Yeah. I would assume that how tall are you?
I'm 6'1".
Being a 6'1", fit, good-looking man, that this would be counterproductive to your professional athletic career because you'd be the belle of the ball and have some opportunities that mere mortals like I would not have.
I'm flattered. I'm flattered. But no,
am I wrong or am I right?
I'm not going to say that you're wrong.
But okay, leaving that aside now, I would love for you to talk about just the relationship between social dancing, partner dancing, and playing a team sport like this. Because when we brought it up in our last conversation, I thought this was so interesting.
And there are a number of dynamics when you partner dance. One, there's generally a person, this more masculine role, who's leading or determining the moves that are going to be done. And then there's a follow, typically a feminine role, who's responding to that. And that ability to interact generally with a stranger, because a lot of times you'll go to a place where you don't know your partner. And so you have to improvise your dance on the fly to music that you're not necessarily knowing. And that dynamic of reading and reacting to a partner or an opponent in concert with maneuvering around other people or other couples who are dancing, similar to your teammates and the other teammates on the floor, helps train a number of crossover cognitive skills. Like obviously there's you interacting with your partner. The only difference when you're social dancing is you're reading and reacting to the partner you're dancing with, and you're trying to work in concert with them. Whereas if I'm in a one-on-one situation with a handball opponent, I'm reading and reacting to them to not work in concert with them. But the same underlying read and react is there, where I'm physically moving myself and I have to be sensitive to the movements of my opponent. And then, like I said, the only difference when I'm dancing is I'm responding to my opponent's movements and then trying to facilitate their next movements being easier. Whereas when I'm on a handball court, I'm responding to their movements. I'm trying to make their movements more difficult.
Ever any opportunity when playing handball to dip and drop someone?
Not legally. I'm trying to think if I have. I've definitely been fouled and have been caught by a teammate in falling over. I think it's probably the closest. I don't think I've dipped an opponent
I,
in handball.
I think it's, I
That
think
would be
actually,
funny.
I think it's actually that if you do get fouled and someone does catch you, you've got to do something out of that. You've got to you got to turn that into a dance step.
I'll work on it in the future. The next time I practice,
Well, you just got to
I'll
practice.
send you a clip.
Yeah, you just got to practice it so you're ready. It's just in your back pocket, ready to pull out.
Yeah, maybe it could be one of our next team celebrations with the guys. But I'm assuming for the group of guys who weren't too fond on wearing bikinis, I'm not sure if a dip is going to be the next team celebration.
Yeah,
but we'll see. If it happens, I'll be sure to send you a clip.
Good point, good point, and even better, good callback. That was pretty.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No, this is a total blast. And I can't tell you how much, I appreciate the conversation, and B, you're being part of what we're doing to help people understand the value of natural movement. I mean, that's, blah, blah, blah. We just are really thrilled that we're able to help, and we're trying to help more people, obviously. So thank you for helping do that. If people want to find out more about you and what you're up to and handball, please tell the humans how they can do that.
Yeah, I've tried to make this simple over the years. You can find me on all social media at Handball Ninja, HANDBALLNINJA. That is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. Basically any social media handle at Handball Ninja, you'll likely find me. And that's the easiest way to get in contact with me and keep up with what I'm doing in the sport of handball and otherwise all across the globe.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Oh, wait. So you haven't been doing this long enough to have a MySpace page?
No, Facebook was my first social media profile. As far as what I would also do, business-wise as well. MySpace I first discovered MySpace when I was in junior high, but I didn't really get into social media until I was in high school.
Oh, God.
But that is a callback. MySpace.com.
Yeah. It's a flashback. It's like, it's funny. You can't say MySpace without people like instantly getting an image in their mind of their MySpace page. It's just like this.
Man. I think when I think MySpace, I think of Tom, obviously. Well, and he's the one person who's everybody's friend.
Yes. You either think of your page or you think of Tom.
You think of Tom. That was brilliant.
Let's leave people on that image in their brain.
Good old MySpace. Now I'm curious what Tom's up to.
I know. That's definitely something. I bet if we just Google what's Tom up to.
I'm sure if we Google what's Tom up to, you can
hold
on.
Wait, I'm going to do it right now. Hold on.
Go for it. Yeah. I'm curious now.
I might have to put in what's MySpace Tom, but I'm going to try what's Tom up to now. And let me see if I get an answer. This would be so great if it'd
be funny if like the first thing that comes up, if what is Tom up to is MySpace Tom.
It is. Here.
It's a thing.
What's been up to since? Well, the 50-year-old lives in Hawaii and appears to be leading an amazing life as a travel photographer, exploring the world and sharing his beautiful snaps from exotic destinations like Thailand, Bhutan, and the Maldives on his Instagram and Twitter accounts. So now you know where Tom is now.
He's on Instagram and Twitter now. Sharing
Oh my God. Oh, that's
brilliant. That'd be good on him. He seems like he's living a good life.
Yeah. I think that's a fine thing.
It's a fine way to live.
All right. Well, speaking of getting out and having fun, first of all, thank you. Oh, wait, next competition coming up, next match?
Next competition, as far as what we're doing with Team USA internationally, we're building up to the 2023 World Beach Games in Bali, Indonesia. So as a link to Tom being an exotic.
Yeah, I was going to say, look for Tom.
That's going to be, look for Tom photographing us in Bali, Indonesia in August 5th through 12th, 2023. That's the next big world competition for my national team.
Good luck with that. I'm only now imagining as it's starting. Well, I was going to say starting to get cold here in Colorado. It's only cold at night. It's in the 30s at night. It's in the 70s all day still. It's crazy. But nonetheless, thinking of Bali, that's a pleasant one as the weather starts to change. So, all right. For the last time, I've said it 5 times. Ebiye, thanks so much. This is, again, a total treat for everybody else. Once again, thank you for joining. And go check out www.jointhemovement.com for previous episodes, all the ways you can interact with us, all the places you can find the podcast. And, of course, if you have any questions or feedback or comments or recommendations for people to have on the show, you can drop me an email. I'm at move@jointhemovement.com. But most importantly, just go out, have fun, and live life feet first.